So, welcome everybody. My name's Eric Owens. I'm director of the International Studies program, and it is always such a pleasure to have our illustrious alums come back and join us to talk about their pathway from the IS major into the career that they've chosen. And we love to see them flourish. And today we have a special added bonus of an alum of a different sort, Professor Frank O'Donnell, who was a professor here for several years and is now left for other full-time work in think tank world that he'll describe to you too. So we have faculty alums and student alums here all. So thank you all so much. This is really a great pleasure. And I want to thank our peer advisors, especially Delphine, who's been working to organize this program over the past month or so. So I want to turn it over to her to get us started, and I look forward to hearing all of this. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our Careers in Public Policy and Think Tanks panel. My name is Delphine Garreau. I'm a peer advisor for the International Studies program, and I'm happy to be helping moderate today.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Vogley. I'm also a peer advisor. Just like a heads up before we start, this will be recorded. Um, and so please keep in mind also like if you have any questions later on, we will be taking some after a few guiding questions that we have. And so yeah.
So like Professor Owen said, we have four wonderful panelists with us today to speak to their experience working in public policy and think tanks. So starting with Professor Frank O'Donnell, who after teaching in the International Studies program now works at the Stimson Center and is currently a non-resident fellow with the Stimson's South Asia program. We also have Daniela Canales with us today, also from the Stimson Center. And after graduating BC in 2023, I believe, she is now a Foreign Policy Futures Fellow at Stimson.
And so we have also Michaela Simonel, graduated from BC in 2018 and now works at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. After having been a program manager and then a research assistant in the Global Health Policy Center, she is now an associate fellow. And finally, we have Margaret Anderson joining us today. She was a BC class of 2019, and after interning with the Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, JPAL, she worked there for full time as a policy associate, senior policy associate, and then a policy manager for JPAL Africa.
So, I guess just to start us off, we'd love to hear from each of you more about your experiences at these different organizations and perhaps how you started working there. So, maybe let's start with Michaela. Could you just give us a brief introduction of yourself and then also to CSIS?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for the invitation. It's always fun to do these. So, as folks described, I graduated from BC in 2018. I had a double major in biology and international studies, originally started off on the pre-medical track, decided to drop that, and was leaving BC trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to stay somewhere at the intersection between biology, epidemiology, diplomacy, geopolitics. And I had friends who had worked at CSIS previously recommend that I apply for a couple of positions that were coming open. So I did that. I was lucky enough to land here, where I've been here now for the past 7 years, always with the Global Health Policy Center. And now in my role as an associate fellow, I'm split between leading our research work and helping drive our research work on pandemic preparedness and response. And then I also lead the secretariat for the 60-person expert group we have called the Bipartisan Alliance for Global Health Security, which helps drive a lot of our work at the center to influence US policy, both domestically and globally, on health security issues. And that looks like a lot of convening, especially closed door convening and public symposia, and then that informs the analysis we put out.
Great. Maybe, Margaret, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for hosting this panel and inviting me to speak today. So my name is Margaret Anderson, and I am a 2019 graduate. I majored in economics with a minor in international studies, specifically the ethics and social justice track. And I, in my BC career, was always searching for work that was at the intersection of those two spaces. And so my junior year, I took an economics class called impact evaluation in developing countries with Professor Paul Cicallo, which opened my eyes to the world of impact evaluation, which is a world that allows us to take us being an econometrics nerd to take our really technical tools in economics to try and actually make an impact and try and help governments and NGOs who are day in and day out trying to make the lives of their citizens better, trying to serve the population they're working with, but often just kind of going on intuition and theory and some research that's out there, but often many political dialogues. And so, what impact evaluation does is it's a method to actually understand what works and doesn't work in social programs and policies and why. And so, JPAL is a research center based at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so just across the river from all of you, that specializes in the use of randomized evaluations particularly to understand the impact of different programs and policies. And so I first went to JPAL as an intern after going to an event that Professor Owens and Cicallo put on together, a recruitment event on campus. And I learned that this was a really specific way that I could apply these econometric tools to international policy. And so I interned in our policy and communications group, went back full time for 4 years, doing a host of different work related to labor markets, education, lots of reading, lots of writing, lots of partnership building. And then I spent the past 2 years living and working in Cape Town, South Africa, being like one level closer to government and NGOs who are actually trying to do this work and be a bridge maker with them. I'll pause there, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity to talk more. Thanks all.
Thank you so much. Professor O'Donnell, do you want to introduce the Stimson Center?
Sure, yeah. So personally, I'm an academic by training. I got a PhD from King's College London. Always interested in Asian security, but especially South Asia, partly because what's happening politically, demographically there is fascinating, but my own background is really in terms of the military security parts of it. And South Asia faces every single type of challenge there simultaneously. So I've been an academic for all of my life, I would say, but increasingly my interest has drawn more to the policy side of it. And so I got more interested in working on the policy side of it. And as part of being an emerging academic, I would, chat with, make contact with, be either invited or offered to write policy pieces for think tanks, including the Stimson Center, which has a terrific South Asia program. And from there, I just drifted more toward the policy side of it and became deputy director at the Stimson Center South Asia program, which is one of the biggest in DC. It takes no position on the various conflicts there. It instead takes a position that it's better to solve these things over dialogue rather than shooting. And a lot of the work is trying to convene these dialogues, whether it's commissioning research, publishing our own research, having either public or private closed door events to discuss emerging developments in the field, what they might mean, how we might help stabilize things in terms of that context, and just really just staying on top of what's happening in the region so that we can again just continue to be that positive influence. However, of course, I still enjoy university teaching. So Professor Owen was kind enough to let me teach at ISP for a few years, the Intro to IR course. I know a few of my former students are here, and you'll have seen, I think me smuggling in South Asia case studies into my teaching. But that's just to say that that's a bit of the background to me and the Stimson Center.
Awesome. And then finally, Daniela.
All right, thank you. My name is Daniela Canales. I graduated in May of 2023 from the IS program. I had minors in philosophy and management for social impact, if I remember. I graduated only 2 years ago, and these have been like some of the fastest years of my entire life. I left the program not really sure of what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I ended up in Washington, D.C. I had an internship for Salvation Army headquarters doing some GIS work. And then after that, I moved into federal government. I worked for the Department of Defense in the F-35 Joint Program Office as a contract specialist. I was there for a year and then was reevaluated by DOGE. And now I am actually in grad school. My position with Stimson Center is actually ad hoc. So I do like a year-long project with them through the Foreign Policy Futures Fellowship. So I'm doing that like on the side while doing my graduate level studies. I'm back in Boston, very excited to be here. So a bit more about the program at Stimson. It's part of the Reimagining U.S. Grand Strategy program. So its overall mission is to test basic assumptions that we often have in international politics and like overall like national security conversations and like reassessing these conventional wisdoms that we often have related to that. So my specific project is related to U.S.-China relations and critical minerals and what like trade looks like for that in the future. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. So and move on from there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I guess I'm going to move backwards with the people who we asked first. So I'll first start by asking Daniela this question and then we'll go backwards. But anyways, how did you all end up working in this organization? I know some of you kind of touched up on this, but how does your particular research and interest fit into the think tank that you're currently working for, and what makes your think tank especially unique in that sense and fitting with your interests?
So I think I ended up in this position in kind of a like a really roundabout way. So I already knew that I was going to be going to grad school like 2 years ago. So I was actually Professor Owens helped me with my application, but I applied to a 2-year deferment program where I would start 2 years after having applied. So I knew I had an out from like my federal job. So I was looking for things that I could do like to supplement my studies, and I just happened to find this opening. It was like a brand new fellowship that opened with Stimson. They had never done this one before, so it wasn't on my radar. And I really, really liked what they were talking about with like challenging basic assumptions that we had in politics, just because I think being in DC for 2 years, really, again, getting that worm in my ear of like what should be happening and what is happening, like it gets to be like a struggle after a while. So having someone actually being open to challenging assumptions, I found that very welcoming. And I applied under the pretense of, well, I did not care for my job in federal government, and I knew that Stimson Center had some similar thoughts to me. So I applied under that like connection of we both are willing to challenge certain things about government and defense and spending and like typical ideology we often hear in DC. I think what I really, really liked about Stimson in particular was its focus on like transparency. They operate in a way that I very much respect. And that was something that I was not expecting from many think tanks, frankly. And so coming into that environment and being surrounded by people who are willing to have those conversations, I've found to be very welcoming.
Thank you so much, Professor O'Donnell.
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Daniela says on transparency with Stimson. It is really refreshing. I think other things, I would say about Stimson that attracted me to it was an emphasis on developing emerging experts. There are other think tanks or places where you see them less and less now, but they have one dominant personality at the top, and you can tell that the rest of the staff is there to make sure that person gets on CNN or network of your choice every night as a talking head. Stimson is not like that. I would say most institutions are starting to phase that out, but Stimson is as far from that as possible. Is focused on developing the most junior staff into the next generation. And as part of that approach, it means that there's generations of alumni, people who have worked at the institution, been interns there, been part of research projects there that the institution can then reach out to when there's a crisis happening, when there's development happening to get kind of perspective, context, things like that, and just building a very large community. So being part of that is a great privilege. And so I came into the South Asia program through that process of being asked first to write something for them, just a brief policy piece, and then just from there getting more engaged in their work as an outside expert. And then when the opportunity came for that job vacancy for deputy director, and knowing that they had the same approach that I did in terms of what I value in terms of my work, which is the mentoring and developing junior experts, the next generation, as well as my expertise in South Asia, was a pretty ideal fit.
Thank you so much. Margaret, how did you end up working at JPAL and your experience and what makes it unique?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So, as I touched on a little bit before, I went to a career, like a recruitment talk hosted at BC, where I first learned about JPAL and decided that was my junior year. And I decided, this is a really cool org that meshes so many of my interests. I want to get there somewhere at my career. I applied for their summer internship program and was lucky enough to be selected. And honestly, when I got to JPAL, I felt that every one of my already high expectations were met and or exceeded. I think one of the things that's super special about the organization are the people, very like-minded people who have a passion and a drive to want to make the world a better place, plus a like academic and analytical rigor, plus an adventurous spirit and desire to travel, just come and like create a culture where I've built some of my best friends from different JPAL colleagues. And I find that if I ever have a challenge or a problem or need to brainstorm, how to approach something, either as an intern or an associate or a manager, there were always so many people willing to lend an ear and willing to engage. And so I originally went to JPAL for like the content of the work. And then after interning there, I felt that there were so many mentors and like colleagues that I could learn from if I went back. And so I actually always thought that when I graduated, I would go into the Peace Corps, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps to get some international experience right when I was quite young. And after being at JPAL, I realized like actually I think this is a really cool launching pad. I can find other opportunities for international engagement, which I ended up being able to do within JPAL with my 2-year stint in South Africa. And so sort of chose for the people and passion and mission to go back. A few things that I think make JPAL unique and are worth calling out. We don't actually consider ourselves a think tank, though I think it's fitting for us to be in this public policy discussion. We really harp on being like a research center. And at our core, we're actually a network of about 1,000, mostly economists, who are all based at academic institutions around the world, united by their use of randomized evaluations to study anti-poverty programs across a range of different sectors and topics. And so something unique in our day-to-day is as a very young junior staff member, I got to be in conversations with leading academics and with their government partners and funding partners around the world. So I was often the youngest person in the room, though the JPAL brand and the academics that we sort of base all of our work on gave us an ability to be in that room and present ourselves and present our world. So I'd say, for me, being at JPAL allowed me to refine and use this really specific tool. But aside from that, it allowed me to be a bit of a generalist. You can put many things in front of me and I'll find interest in it. And I was able to work in education, labor markets, climate, health with colleagues in Latin America, Africa, East Asia, sort of across the palette. That just gave me a lot of exposure and I think is very similar to my colleagues and peers who were also through the pipeline at JPAL.
Thank you, Margaret. And last but not least, Michaela.
Thank thanks. And I'll go back because I realized I didn't explain what CSIS is and who we are and what we do, and that's the challenge of going first. But we're a think tank also based here in Washington, D.C., and we're nonpartisan, strictly by definition, international security focused research institution. And so the goal, as we describe it, is advancing practical ideas to help address the world's greatest challenges and help guide decision makers towards more thoughtful policy that helps define the future of national security. So I had known that CSIS had this reputation for nonpartisanship and problem solving, and knew that that was something that I wanted to be a part of and see what that space looks like. I had been enamored with the idea of being in Washington and being part of the policy landscape, but I really had no idea when I was coming into CSIS what that looked like. And coming from BC, I had an interest in global health, but it was before there was a formal global health major. So a lot of that interest was informed in technical background in biology, and then the rigorous international studies program and the background that provides, and then some extracurricular work and internships in global health that were kind of guiding my path. So I landed at CSIS, where we very much in our Global Health Policy Center try to articulate what the connection is between global health issues and national security issues and make that front and center for policymakers. And so I started this in pre-COVID times, then was doing this through the COVID pandemic, and then it became much easier for a while to do my job then. And now we're in this post-COVID phase where it's become more difficult again to convince folks that pandemics are important. But I think a couple of things I've really appreciated about CSIS. One is the opportunity, even within such a small policy shop as our Global Health Policy Center team, to work on a diversity of projects. So I worked on polio eradication in Afghanistan during the time of the Taliban withdrawal in 2018, 2019. Worked on global vaccination and vaccine confidence through the COVID-19 pandemic. I've gotten to work on bird flu as it emerged as an issue in the United States, how biology and artificial intelligence are converging, and what it looks like for global health diplomacy to advance, especially with US competitors. So we have a project looking at US-China cooperation on global health security and how that can provide a pathway for stabilizing the relationship more broadly. So one, it's a cool grab bag of issues, which means day to day I get to work on a lot of different things. And I think across CSIS within each of our different programs, whether those are topically focused or geographically focused, I think that's something that generally across the institution attracts folks here, is that there's quite a breadth of research that we're undertaking day to day, and quite a lot of crosswalk between different departments. So when I'm working on a project on AI and biology, I go to our AI team and we're able to collaborate on those issues. I also think CSIS, as being a longstanding think tank, we were founded in 1962. Our reputation and our reach allows us to convene policymakers from within the US government, from the Hill, from the private sector, from nonprofit organizations, academia, and have this reputation that we're a safe space to have really difficult conversations that are focused on problem solving. And I think, especially right now with the difficult environment in Washington, that's been really essential for us in being able to continue our work. And as someone who started off fresh out of BC, it's been a great opportunity to just be a sponge and interact with very senior folks with real policymaking expertise and hear how they think and problem solve, and seeing the diversity of pathways that have led them to working on the same issues. And I think that's been instructive to me, both in thinking about where I want my career to go and thinking about all of the different pathways that my career could take that I certainly hadn't thought about before I got here.
Thank you so much for all of those answers. I have one more structured question that I'd like to ask, and then we'll open it up for some student questions. So be thinking of those too. So I'm curious, and anyone can kind of jump in on this one, but what transferable skills do you think still students can build now while they're in school that can help them go into policy research? Was there anything that was very helpful for you as maybe an IS major that you got involved with at school? I know we had some internships that were helpful in bridging that gap, but yeah, if anyone feels particularly passionate about answering that question.
I can jump in. Oh, Margaret, you have your hand up. Go ahead first.
I can kick us off and then definitely others come in. So there are a couple of things that came to mind for me as you were speaking. I think just first from the JPAL lens, if you are interested in working at JPAL, it is a very economics focused organization. So I would definitely make sure to get in some more technical econ classes. Ideally, if you could take an econometrics class or better yet, Professor Cicallo's impact evaluation course, like that alone would set you up to have flying colors throughout the recruitment process. Though outside of JPAL specifically, I would say two of the like types of questions that professors asked me and that I built while at BC that I use today. One comes from Professor Owens, always asking the question, what's at stake here? So not just looking at, a news headline or, a theory that we're taught in the class, but really going a step or two or three deeper and saying like, why does this matter? And how does this relate to different things? And the other professor who I've mentioned a few times, Professor Cicallo, through an econ lens, he would always have us like first do the analysis with numbers, data, the technical side. And then he'd say, now describe this as if you were talking to your grandma and she's never taken an economics class. And those two sort of frameworks of like, what's at stake? How does this connect with the broader picture? And tell this to someone who's never taken a academic course in what you're talking about, just give you a tool of language and ability to be able to, one, push your own thinking, but two, relate and connect to others in a way that I think certainly supports you in the professional world, but also makes you a more interesting like dinner guest, and just I think brings a broader depth to life.
Yeah, that's good advice. Professor O'Donnell, I think you raised your hand.
Oh no, Michaela was first. Go ahead, Michaela.
Okay, perfect.
Jumping all around in line here. So I guess in terms of topical research skills, or topical interest, I would say follow whatever interests you. That's going to make you the more compelling candidate. If you love econometrics, take econometrics. If you don't love econometrics, don't try and force yourself to love econometrics. I think within within CSIS, we have folks who come from such a diversity of backgrounds, be that STEM plus IR in all sorts of different fields or all sorts of different regional focuses. So I would say hone in on what really lights you up, and that will come through in your interviews. And ultimately, you're going to be working on this on the day to day. At the same time, don't look for the job that's the perfect fit to your interests, because I think there's a lot of ways to learn from something that's adjacent to your exact topical focus. So for me, that would be if I was working on development issues more broadly, that then could be transferable into getting a little closer to the issues that you're hoping your career focuses on in the long term. Strong research and writing skills are really important. I think you get those through your education at BC. I did a thesis project with Professor Owens as my advisor, which was a great lesson in how to do research, and also some really great lessons about how not to do research and structure a year-long research project that were really instructive to me in just how I operate and how I think on longer term timelines, because most of your projects in the professional world will not be, okay, I have a paper due in 2 weeks. It's something that you're trying to plot out over the course of weeks and months and potentially even years. And so having that long-term forecasting can be really useful. And then I think on the day-to-day, some of the skills that I use the most are also those that I developed through leadership and extracurricular organizations. And I think that teaches you important people management skills. Everything in the professional world is a group project. Communication skills, the ability, like Margaret was saying, to communicate information really succinctly and deliver it well, which is important both when you're working with peers or if you're in a management role or if you're managing up to your boss. And I think there's ways to learn all of those at BC, and I would just try and do all of them.
I agree with everything that has been said previously, and so it's hard to find things to add. But a couple of 2 or 3 points I would just make quickly is, as well as following your own expertise, just getting more experience yourself in terms of writing and finding your own voice on these issues. even if you are interested in econometrics, um, still thinking about, how can I write on this? I have opinions, for example, on US economic policy, either internal or external. There's a lot happening in both. Um, Writing an article for the student newspaper, writing a letter to the Boston Globe, any opportunity to write and get published and just kind of get that experience of making an argument for a policy and also for a public audience is invaluable. And if you can get some kind of a publication record, and as I say, it can be a letter to the newspaper, it does help. But that's something that I try to do myself very early on, is get the experience myself of finding out my own opinions and interests and communicating those just through writing. Um, the second point I'd make is that one of the uh, I don't want to say fortunate because nothing fortunate came out of COVID, but one of the outcomes of that is that compared to when I was coming up, there was a lot more that think tanks do that is on webinars and is available to people who are not physically based in DC. And so a lot of these are online. You can just sign up for it as anybody, as a member of the public. And if there is on a topic that is of special interest to you and you can fit it around your schedule, definitely do attend it. And a lot of them are on Zoom afterward, but I find, at least myself, if I don't sign up to physically attend it virtually at the time, and I'll say I'll watch the 2 hour Zoom recording after, you won't because things come up. After that, after you virtually attend, and there was at least one person's remarks that intrigued you, they made a point that you found interesting, or you just want to hear more about, send them an email. Look them up and say, I really enjoyed your remarks. I found what you mentioned here really interesting. You might have that follow-up question that you have, and just a brief line introducing you and your research. And it helps both in terms of, again, developing your voice, but also just candidly in terms of networking. They'll remember you if you're applying to, their organization later on, and you can reference that conversation. But the webinars is a great thing that I wish I had when I was in your position. The last point I make just in general on internships are of course invaluable. As I said at the start of this call, I think before some of you joined, the ISP newsletter is one of the best I've ever seen in terms of keeping track of what new vacancies are out there, especially in DC. Another one I'll just drop in the chat that I always recommend is 80,000 hours. I'll just drop it in the chat. The roles there are kind of AI heavy, which reflects the organization itself, but more and more think tanks are putting their vacancies on there for a variety of different programs. And as well as that, I would recommend, just to be honest, building a Word document with the recruitment pages of each of the major think tanks and just checking them weekly. That combination is, I think, invaluable. I can go into more depth in terms of, what to do and say, what not to do and say in an interview if we have time, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would love to open it up to some student questions if there are any. You can virtually raise your hand, or if you want to just start talking, that's good too. Does anyone have any questions? We'll give it like maybe 10 more seconds to let the silence set in.
I'll jump in briefly, and others can jump in later. Thank you all. This is so terrific. Really, really great to hear all this. One of the things I think that students talk to me about is that you're all working for quite well-known and prestigious organizations, and that can feel pretty intimidating for students. And for every, IS major who goes to work for one of the places you're working, there's a lot who apply and who don't get those slots. And so maybe could you offer a few words of advice about adjacent and other programs, and how to reframe this, that you don't need to start in one particular place to have a terrific career or to move to that place later, or how to enter into that mindset, given what I think you all know now that you're on the hiring side, or the things of just like the the flood of anxiety and the massive numbers of applications and all this stuff. So what can you tell current students about how to face that and to think more broadly about where they might do some really interesting work?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So one is it's a kind of an obvious answer, but just persistence, and not taking no for an answer. There are many organizations out there. You'll likely submit many applications. All you need is one yes, even if it takes 60, 70, 100 no's to get there. All you need is one yes. So if you are applying and you are, you're getting rejections, I always, I always ask for feedback on your application and what you could do to strengthen it. But don't be put off, by that. Just believe in yourself and know that you have what it takes to get there because you do. And as well as that, obviously, make sure that you're doing things outside of applying for jobs or worrying about that. It's easy to say, but it helps you keep perspective. So when I'm not just coming out of college, but when I've been between jobs, I try to keep it like the job application process to be like a 9 to 5, treat it like a job, and have evenings and weeknights and keep up with friends and things like that. Um, there's other things that you can be doing. I mean, you can spend the time to be developing these kinds of articles that I talked about to develop your voice. There might be opportunities for you to reach out to a professor that you worked with or you studied with to ask, are you doing anything that I could work as a research assistant on? Just to help, as I say, it helps develop your resume and it just helps develop your skills in the field. But yeah, I mean, the number one thing I would say is just that kind of self-belief, and often it's not you, it's just the organization. And organizations often have strange rules for why, or just strange habits in terms of who they hire and who they don't at a certain point of time. But persistence is key. Yeah.
Couple of things I would add to that. I would just foot stomp the point on persistence is key. I have found folks to be so remarkably generous with their time and how much they're willing to have conversations with students or recent grads, especially within the BC Alumni Network, but even extending beyond that to connections of connections. But you have to be annoying about it. And so that means if you send an email and they don't write back, it's not that they hate you, it's that maybe they didn't see your email or they saw your email and put it on a to-do list and a few weeks go by. So just be really persistent about following up with folks. And also you have a network even as a student, and I would use that, and that's your professors, it's your peers, it's friends from extracurriculars who are a couple years above you. And I would really use that. Flagging a resume really, really makes a difference, especially at some of these organizations that have a lot of weight behind their name. And that doesn't have to be someone who you have a direct personal connection with. It can be a connection of a connection. But it really helps if you're sitting in a pile of hundreds of resumes to get yours looked at. That also means making a LinkedIn if you don't have one, which is an annoying but small step. I would also look at beyond some of the bigger name organizations you might have heard of, look at who they're citing in their publications, look at what other organizations they're working with, who's speaking at their events. There's a huge constellation of organizations based in DC, whether those are advocacy organizations or professional associations, kind of academic affiliates, private sector, a lot of places that I didn't know existed before I came to DC that are a really important part of the policymaking space. So you don't have to be at a think tank, and sometimes you can have an even greater impact, I think, if you're not at a think tank doing related work. And then two quick other things. One, I would really concentrate on how you consume information and try and find some newsletters or Substacks or podcasts or whatever about the topics that you're interested in to help stay up to date on things. That'll help expose you to new experts who are coming on and speaking who might be at organizations that are interesting to you that you wouldn't have thought of before. And it helps you keep up to date so that when you have an interview, you have interesting things to talk about related to the work that the organization is doing. And then we're a nonprofit at CSIS. I know a lot of other think tanks are nonprofits. Quite a lot of our hiring cycles for interns are on a semesterly basis, but then a lot of our other positions are just based on when we get a new grant, which is usually on annual cycles. So a lot of grants align with the fiscal year calendar for the government, which runs starting at the beginning of October. So going into the late summer, early fall is when some organizations might have a sense if they have positions opening up. It's also for entry-level positions when a lot of folks, if they're leaving an organization to go to grad school or something else, they'll know. So summertime, early fall is generally when we have the most openings.
I completely agree with all the sentiments that we've shared already. Especially in terms of just like keeping at it and like keep applying, send out hundreds of applications if you have to. I know I did, not even just to think tanks, and I've applied to even some of the ones that are here on this panel right now. But I think one of the biggest lessons I learned when I was leaving Boston College was that you do not have to like your first job. It's more important to just get your first job than to like your first job. And you'll learn a lot in your first job, even if you are not enjoying the work you're doing. And the skills that you'll build there are, I'd say, more transferable and maybe sometimes more important than the skills that you build in class. So not that the skills I built in the classroom were not valuable, but I think that in terms of, I guess, marketing myself to think tanks and to graduate schools and to other positions, having some work experience between undergrad and this role now meant a lot. So that's something that I just like want to emphasize. If you do not get your first job at a think tank, that's not a huge problem. Like you can find other ways to get there eventually, and most of your life will not be like applying to these jobs right when you're in school. You have a long time to go to keep applying, and you do not have to make sure that it's your immediate job that you get once you leave BC. And I also want to emphasize, like, do not be afraid to be annoying, cold call people, cold email, but definitely cold call if you can. People still value phone calls. Even me, like I'm still, I consider myself to be a fairly young person, and I suddenly feel so old school, wanting people to call me instead of like email. And I just think that if you are willing to put yourself out there, you'll realize that your network is bigger than you think. It is more than the connections you have on LinkedIn. It's everyone in your program. It's the people in your class. It's your friends. It's your friends' friends. Even like when you don't think you're networking, you are networking. So reach out to the people that you have and really do not be embarrassed about it. Just keep at it.
All of the other panelists gave excellent insights, so I'll just share two more things. One piece is that I think that being at a research center like J-PAL or a think tank, having other types of experiences makes you a lot better at your job. So some of the people I've learned the most from are people who've directly been in an implementing role at an organization based in East Africa or wherever they were based, trying to actually implement the work that, I'm sitting over thinking of at a high level, and they can just bring like a lot more perspectives into the broader work that we do. So if you're interested in the evidence space, you can look at J-PAL's database and see who are all of the partners that have agreed to conduct a randomized evaluation of their program. They're probably an organization that cares a lot about evidence. They probably have a pretty cool monitoring and evaluation team. Like you could try looking to apply at any of their places, or if there's like a funder that you respect their philosophy and the way that they do things, look at their grantees. Who have they funded? And do they have open job applications? Those could be other ways to like get in the network and expand your pool of places that you're looking at. And then two, we're all part of the International Studies program. Some of you have probably had international experiences to varying degrees. If you want to work in the international space, it only helps to have more and varied international experiences. And that's something that's often much easier to do the younger you are, at least in terms of like uprooting life and relationships and deciding to take, in many cases, a much lower salary than you could make otherwise in the US, because you're just potentially in an opportunity where you're okay doing that and not necessarily in as much of the accumulation phase. So just like look at organizations you're inspired by and try and figure out who are their partners or grantees, and then see about getting international experience, whether it's through the Peace Corps or other programs. There are lots.
Thank you so much. Those were all great pieces of advice. Does anyone have any questions from the students?
Sorry, I had a quick question. Sorry, I don't know why my hand raising function isn't really working. But I was just wondering, like, obviously there are so many applicants and the application process is very competitive for like all these different roles. I was wondering, like, just from like an IS, a BCIS program perspective, like, do you think that there are some specific skills that we've all like uniquely developed that we can lean into a little bit more, especially during like the application process and something that will potentially differentiate us a little bit from other applicants?
Sure,
I can
Professor
go
Brown.
first. Nobody else supposed to jump on that. Yeah, I think partly to what we just said previously, ISP by design is an international program. And so you all do have a level of international experience that you bring to the table that other students at other colleges might not necessarily have. Not just through the design of the program, but also just through your fellow students there, who you should absolutely also see as your network. Um, just kind of more general advice following on that as somebody who's been on both sides of the hiring table. It might sound obvious, but when you're applying to a specific, I think tanks they tend to call departments programs instead. So when you're applying to a specific program, make sure you know that program inside out in terms of what each project that they're doing, um, uh, if possible, who the reviewing person will be for your application so that you can address the cover letter personally. Because when you get to interview, you'd be surprised how many people it's clear are just applying to the role because it's a vacancy, and how many people applied to it because they really wanted to work with this program, and have obviously done their research. And you can, when they start explaining, talk about how the program works in detail, as a hiring manager, you at least for me starting to think about slotting them in and seeing them as part of the program, which is a very important step. Um, Also, make sure to tie in the cover letter not just your skills and experience to mention them, but to tie them specifically to what the program does. So, this research experience will be invaluable to this core research project that you're working on. A lot of cover letters, do a great job of selling yourself in terms of I've done this, I've done that, but to link it specifically into what the program is doing. And then in the interview itself, make sure to always have follow-up questions, because that demonstrates that you have real interest, again, and that you've done your homework on the organization itself. And in case you don't have any to follow up on what was said in the interview, three I always had in my back pocket that you can ask regardless of the position are one, in terms of the different tasks and responsibilities in the job specification, could you describe the average percentage on a daily, weekly basis that the successful candidate would be spending on each? Two, I was wondering who I'd be reporting to and what the reporting structure is of the program. And three, what projects do you have coming up beyond those listed in the application materials? The great thing about those questions is that whatever they say, you can say, "Great, that sounds fantastic." There's no wrong answer to that, but the question shows you've done your research. I've talked a lot. I'll pause there.
Couple quick things I would add. I would second, I always love the question from being on both sides of the hiring process of what projects are coming up that you're excited about, because it then has an opportunity for you to demonstrate that you've really looked at the program. If you can have follow-up questions on that and say, well, how does this connect to this work that you've done recently? And it just gets the interviewer talking about something they're excited about, presumably, which leaves the end of the interview with everyone in a good mood, which can only be beneficial for you. I would not shy away from the administrative skills you built through your work at BC. And this probably comes more from internships and extracurricular activities than class itself. But you'll find transferable skills you didn't know you had. I ended up doing a lot of budgeting for our program when I first landed at CSIS and was able to leverage skills that I had developed beforehand. I did some podcast editing, which I had edited music for our dance company. So there's random things like that that will come into play. And I think being able to adapt and fill voids and talk about how you might be poised to do that, one, makes you a valued team player, and two, I think sets you up in a position where you can really learn a lot about the organization by understanding how some of those core administrative functions work. And I know that's been useful for me the longer I've been at CSIS. One tip I always try and pass on the interview process and the application process in general, even though it seems pretty basic, is make sure you read all of the instructions, submit the materials exactly as they're asked to be submitted, and submit all of them. I think a lot of applicants do themselves a disservice by, say, someone's asking for a cover letter and a resume and they only submit one or the other, or it's addressed to the wrong person, or it's supposed to be all in one document. And those little things, if someone's going through hundreds of applications, they'll see that as a check where it might have just been that you were moving too quickly, but they'll see that as, oh, you're not following instructions, and so I'm not going to bring this person on my team. So it seems harsh, but I think it's one little extra bit of due diligence you can do to just set yourself up on the right foot. And I think leaning into the liberal arts background of BC and the interdisciplinary nature of the international studies program sets BC apart from some other security studies focused programs or political science focused programs, where it lends a unique perspective to a lot of the work we do that I think can be really, really valuable. And then language skills are always useful. And I think if you want to get into a job that has a regional focus, they're really essential. Everyone on our Middle East team has Arabic language skills, say. I'm pretty positive. So, and those skills, it's just way easier to develop language skills while you're still at BC versus once you graduate.
I wanted to emphasize a point that I think probably everyone here probably is already aware of, but when you're interviewing with a place, I think it's pretty important to make sure that you are aligning yourself with the values of the organization that you are meeting with. So for me, I know like when I was interviewing with Stimson, the specific program I was applying for really valued having like a strong voice. So I kind of took that as an opportunity where while in some interviews, maybe I would not normally be as opinionated as I was in my Stimson interview. I felt like I had a chance to be a bit more unique by expressing my own thoughts about things and like having a more of a conversation about that. I also wanted to add that I think that my interview with Stimson was one of the most unique interview experiences I ever had. I have been on panel interviews where I was interviewed by a panel, and I've been on panel interviews where it's one person interviewing several of us, and this was both. And it was a very interesting experience, especially when they did not tell us beforehand. But I found it to be, frankly, a fun interview to be a part of. You get to hear from everyone else and like see how like where they're coming from and like why they think they're valuable. And I think that hearing other people interview was strangely also very helpful to see like how do I actually stand compared to other interviewees? Because you really never know unless you're in an experience like that. And yeah, I think so. Bottom line, always like make sure you're understanding the organization, whether it's like you're understanding the actual structure of it, so like who you're reporting to, or the values that like you're actually trying to align yourself with.
Well, thank you all so much. This has been such an informational panel, and I'm sure really helpful to me personally as a student at BC, but also to everyone else here tonight. Um, we only have a few more minutes left, so I think we're gonna leave off here unless there's any like short last minute question. But I don't see any hands raised or anything like that. So I just want to thank you all so much again. This recording will be posted on our YouTube video for anyone that had to jump in and out, or didn't get a chance to watch. So again, yeah, thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts, Professor Owens?
Just thoughts of gratitude. Thank you all for all that you do, for the gifts you're giving to our students over the years by talking to them and giving sage advice like this. And most importantly, thank you for the work you do. You're making the world a better place, and we're proud of you. So thank you for all of that. And always love to see everybody. Whenever you pass around the region, let me know. I'll buy you coffee or take you to lunch or whatever. It'd be great to see you again. So thanks all for taking the time. And thank you, Hannah and Delphine, for making this happen. Have a great night, everybody.